Welcome in to the Wednesday edition of the 14. I'm Chris Lee. Blake Lovell joins me, as is always the case. Blake, I don't know if it was the best night of basketball in the SEC on Tuesday night. Not always the most interesting night, but we watched all four games. Always stuff to talk about. I'm going to go with Alabama and Auburn as the game we're going to talk about first, but I just want to hand it off to you to give me your tip of the memory thoughts on what you saw last evening in the SEC.
Yeah, you had some games that weren't overly competitive. We didn't exactly, but I think we knew that going in. We didn't think that, we thought LSU should be able to do what they did against Vanderbilt. We thought Arkansas should be able to do what they did against South Carolina, given the Gamecocks just being up and down. And, I think the Alabama-Auburn game, knowing that Sharif Cooper wasn't going to play, probably went about how you expected it to. I mean, as we've said, I think Auburn's still a capable team, and it was a 12-point game, but I think you never really felt like it was a situation where Alabama was going to be in trouble in this one. I think they led the entire way. I don't think Auburn ever actually had a lead. So that was kind of it. Kentucky Ole Miss was, as we predicted, a bit of a rock fight at times, but good win for Ole Miss. So yeah, it was an interesting night. Maybe not the most competitive from a game standpoint outside of, as we said, just maybe the Kentucky Ole Miss game, and even Alabama and Auburn was good at times. But the others felt like you felt pretty good about Arkansas and LSU. So
the Alabama Auburn game, I think, takes the cake as one of the strangest games I've seen all year. And adding to that, I think Dane Bradshaw's kids broke into the broadcast at one point. I don't know if you were watching that.
Yes.
But there was that. There was the camera going out there, so
Yes.
We got the fish bubble lens almost view underneath the goals where those poor announcers, I don't know how they could tell anything that was happening. So that happened a couple times. You had the fact that Alabama looked like it was going to run Auburn out of the gym for about 10 or 15 minutes. And then it turned into a rock fight for a while. And then you have just some of the oddest box score stuff I've seen all year, okay? Auburn has 23 turnovers to Alabama's 7. And yet that was still a game where it was sort of in the balance at some point, in the last few minutes. I guess to take a sidebar, when Wright State loses a tournament game on its home floor where at the 24-point lead with under 7 minutes. I'm sure you saw that. I guess that stretches the bar pretty far for in the balance. But in all seriousness, this game was one of those that, had Alabama not hit a basket the last couple minutes and Auburn hit a couple 3-pointers, you could have seen this going down to the wire. But Auburn, with a 16 turnover deficit and somehow in the game. Now, part of it's explained by Auburn out rebounding Alabama by 12. So there was that. It was just an odd game to watch, not the prettiest game, but one of those you're watching and you're seeing some of the stats and you're like, how do I explain what's going on here?
Yeah, I think that's why, like you said, it was competitive, but I never really felt like Auburn was probably going to be able to win because I didn't think they would be able to score enough points. Even though Alabama, like we said, it's not like they were scoring 90 or anything, but Alabama's defense, which we talked about all year long, it's that's the difference. And I never felt like Auburn was going to be able to find enough consistent offense to be able to win that game. And, as we saw, that's kind of the way it worked. And really, I think the theme for Auburn, is kind of, I don't know, like it's sort of hard to look at them and you kind of know what you're getting without Sharif Cooper on the floor. Like we talked about in the last game, their starters scored 75 of their 77. You had your starters do the bulk of the work again here. Dylan Cardwell added 6 off the bench and that kind of stuff. But I think that's one of the things in a game like that where Alabama's already got the regular season title wrapped up, but there's motivation because it's Alabama and Auburn. And so I didn't think Alabama played their best game, but I just never felt like Auburn was going to be able to put up enough points to win. Jaden Shackelford, like we said, he's made us look pretty good the past couple games in terms of us finally deciding, hey, we've got to put somebody in this 14-13 spot in our player rankings for the season, and we decided on putting him there. So he's played pretty well, and I think that just overall, Alabama's defense is the story. Once again, I think we all love offense, but the reason they are in this position is because of their defense.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up Shackelford. That's where I was going to go next because part of this is you look at the stats and you put some importance on those because I do believe in lending importance to things that you can quantify and points, rebounds, assists, steals, all those things are things that you can quantify. But at the same time, I also put a lot of emphasis, and you do too, on okay, when it's going badly, who do you trust? Or when the game's on the line, who do you trust? And he's the guy that just increasingly, as I watch them, seems to get the ball. That happened again last night. He leads him in scoring with 23 points. Yeah, I know we made the right call now on including him in our 23, but did you see the play? Because I know we were both switching around games. You might have missed this. I want to say there was about 15 minutes left in the game. He's driving down the lane. I don't know if he got tripped because I've not seen the replay, but like he kind of loses his balance, but sort of regains it at the same time, almost as he loses it, and throws up some kind of a crazy,
Yeah.
5-footer that he just kind of floats in, except he made it all look natural. I don't know how to explain it if you didn't see it, but it was just one of those plays I looked at. I was like, goodness gracious, that kid's good.
Yeah, people were like, what is like, how did that happen? But like you said, it's just because he's good. I mean, he's one of the best freshmen in the league last year. Like, I think that's what you have to remember too. Is like this isn't just coming out of nowhere. I think for a guy like this, like he stepped in last year, and that team, that team was average. They were 16 and 15, but he was a huge bright spot for them in terms of how he played in his first season, and then to see kind of what he's done this year. He's had 20-point games. He's consistently hit double figures in scoring. I think that's one of the things where Alabama, it's all about guards, and that's not to take anything away from anyone else on that roster. Like Jordan Bruner brings a lot as a 6'10" guy that can, do different things, but like their guards just push everything. And like I'm also including Herbert Jones in that group because I've said it many times, like he can play any position. You can classify him as a guard, a post, however you want to do it. But like their guards are the ones that push things forward. And I think Shackelford, arguably, I mean, yes, John Petty, very important, and he's one of the best players in the league too, as we ranked him, I think, ninth. But like Shackelford is one of the guys that really just makes everything go for them. He's that good. And so yeah, when you have that luxury of having all these different guys you can go to, that is why Alabama is sitting here with 20 wins and why they're 15-2 in the league.
Okay, I know with Herb Jones, the case for player of the year with him is built on so many things, tangible and intangible. The fact that, he almost plays like a point guard at times. I mean, he gets rebounds. He's a good defender. He blocks shots. I mean, he is a complete basketball player. And as you and I both know, he's been hurt. But for the second time in 9 games last night, he scores in double figures and he only gets 10. Do we have any reservations about making a guy who doesn't score that much SEC player of the year?
I mean,
because I'm not saying it's the wrong call, but that has kind of stuck in the back of my mind for a while.
Well, I think from a normal voting poll perspective, as in like knowing how polls go and such, I do think that's where the hesitation is going to lie, and I wouldn't be surprised if someone else wins it. But I guess that's my thing. If you don't give it to him, I legitimately think that the only other choice at this point is Moses Moody.
Yes.
And I really think like that's it. And I see like a lot of people on social media and stuff are talking about, well, Moses Moody is probably going to be freshman of the year now. Well, like, he could be player of the year. Like, I don't even think it's just we're going beyond the freshman of the year. Like, I get it. Like, you have to give that award too, and certainly he's there. But I just don't really, the Cam Thomas thing, as we've talked about. You can't ignore Cam Thomas. Like Cam Thomas, listen. Since we did the rankings, Cam Thomas must have listened because he's come out like he's rebounding now. He had a double against Vanderbilt. He had 7 rebounds against Arkansas. That's what we want to see from him. So maybe he just hasn't done it enough, but he is contributing in other areas. So I mean, to me, it's those 3. And like you said, I think the one thing that would, in a typical voting scenario, that would hold Herbert Jones back would be the lack of scoring. But I think, too, we're probably looking at it at a deeper level just because that's what we're trying to do. in terms of putting in the extra data and the metrics and just the overall value and just watching the team play. Like, as I've said, I think Herbert Jones, in terms of just pure value, like, that guy is, I just, there's so many things that don't even show up in the stat sheet, I think, that are so valuable to what he does. And I get it. Like, that's sort of you may say, well, it's all about what's in the stats or whatever, but I think it goes beyond that sometimes. But I mean, it's clearly those three. I don't think there's any doubt that those are the three. That's why I think we ultimately decided to rank them as our top three. I know I was higher on Cam Thomas than you were, but I think that's what you're saying is correct. Like, if Herbert Jones is not voted the SEC Player of the Year by the media, the coaches, or whatever, maybe that's a reason. It's because of the scoring. But if it's not him, I tend to think that Moses Moody is probably moving closer towards that spot, maybe again ahead of Cam Thomas, just because of what Moses Moody has done. I mean, he's filling up the stat sheet too, but he's scoring a lot of points to go along with it. So,
well, I'm not saying this is wrong, right? But sometimes media narrative becomes important, and I wonder if Herb Jones hasn't had that going on for a while,
yeah,
what this discussion looks like, because it usually is based on scoring more than anything. I think that the guys who I think get the biggest boost in rankings in terms of where I think it is maybe undeserved is volume scorers who don't shoot a high percentage. And that really is our debate on Cam Thomas, right? That's
yeah,
what we talked about at length. Jones does not fit any kind of narrative in terms of what usually gets anointed player of the year, other than maybe best player on the best team. But again, that's kind of been defined by the media. And I mean, that's an oversimplification, because I think that Nate Oates might say that too. But, we kind of squeezed Jaden Shackelford into the player of the discussion and framed it as, well, does he belong in the 14? And I wonder now, I don't know, you only go what's in front of you. And it's been an excruciatingly difficult year to try to rank players. And I had this discussion with some people this weekend. I said, look, this is a year where I think the league might be 30 or 40 deep with good players. But in terms of guys who've had elite seasons, not a lot of guys, right? I mean, and so that's the thing. You throw these guys in a hat, and you just, it almost feels like drawing names, right? Because you can make a case for so many of them. But Shackelford, again, not that everything is scoring, but he's hit double figures 10 of the last 11 games. If you go back further than that, I think it's 13 out of 20 or so, or no, it's more than that actually.
Yeah.
I mean, he has 6 against LSU in that blowout win where they didn't need him. He has 9 against Tennessee and Ole Miss, back-to-back games that they win back in December and January, the first 2 games of the year. I mean, he's been consistent, man. 23 last night, 15 the game before, 5 the game before, 27, 18, 10, 15. I could just keep going backwards. But he's done some other things. He rebounds a good bit. Not a big assist guy, but doesn't turn it over a ton either. Picks up a few steals. I don't know. I don't know where you put Shackelford in this, but the fact that Alabama's the best team, and again, maybe if Herb Jones is 100%, it looks different, but the fact that he is kind of their go-to guy lately as I watch them, it seems, I don't know, that seems to carry a lot of weight.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's no doubt. And I mean, like we said, I do think Shackelford has kind of become the guy that has sort of pushed them, certainly on the offensive side. I mean, he's just become, like we said, he's someone who you can see everything he does. You point out the play in that game against Auburn, and then, you look at Herbert Jones, and it's like, I mean, he had 2 points against Mississippi State, but it's like they won that game by 5. Do they win that game if he doesn't get 14 rebounds? It's just, he does, it's the weird things like that. And as we said, too, I think if you put it in the perspective of knowing that he has been playing injured probably for, I don't know how long now, several weeks at least, that has probably contributed too, because they're probably in those games that he scored single digits, if you combine all his scoring, Cam Thomas or Moses Moody or someone's probably had that in a single game. And so I think that's what you have to look at with that. And you brought it up, you said it best, I think. Like Herbert Jones is an unusual scenario here because we don't really have anything, I think, to compare it on in terms of putting it in the scope of player of the year conversation. Because again, everyone gravitates towards the points. And if you do that, you're probably leaning more towards Cam Thomas or Moses Moody. So I think it's a good debate because I think it brings up the value of, what is what are the things that you kind of look at the most, and I think that's where you kind of see, because again, polls are subjective when you make these votes and everything like that. So I think that's something to keep in mind. But I do think it's pretty clear at this point. Like it's a 3-person race, and I think it's probably saying, okay, what do you value the most? Because I would say of that 3-man group, Herbert Jones is the one that's going to do the least scoring. Cam Thomas, probably the one that's going to do the least outside of scoring. And then Moses Moody, I mean, he's the one that kind of does a little bit of everything, right? Like he can score, he can rebound high volume. So I don't know. Like, does that make his case even better for what, Arkansas right now is arguably? I mean, they're playing better than Alabama, I think, when you look at it from certain angles. So there's a lot of things you could look at, but you're not going wrong, I think, just in terms of looking at those 3 talents specifically. But it is an unusual, I think, scenario comparing the 3.
Yeah, and I feel like most years, Herb Jones is a guy that maybe slips on the second team, right? And I'm the guy sitting here with his hand raised going, hey, wait a minute, we're putting too much emphasis on scoring.
Yeah.
Because if you look at everything he does, he belongs in that. I feel like the script has kind of flipped with this year and how the discussion has been framed, which is interesting. But, the other thing in Jones's defense, too, Alabama ran away with this thing pretty early. And some of his more down games, especially in terms of scoring, have been after Alabama's had a 3 or 4 game lead. So I think time horizon is sort of important too.
Yeah, agreed. And I think that's worth pointing out. And look, if Alabama wasn't at the very top of the standings, maybe we're not having that conversation. If they weren't 15-2, won 15 of their 17 SEC games, maybe he does slide back a bit. But I think in terms of the overall value, is Alabama the best team overall? Yes, I think so, because we talked about all the options they have. But I just think if you look at what he brings to the table, it's just one of those things where, the injuries too, I think has to be put into that discussion, because, and we can only, again, we can play that game. We said it many times, you can play the what if scenarios, but a fully healthy Herb Jones these past however many games, I feel like it's different. He's still putting up numbers. He's still putting up, typically at least 5 rebounds, almost 5 assists a game, and the points are there too. So it's I don't know, he does so many things. That's why I think it's kind of hard to ignore in that discussion.
Well, and there's even different ways you can treat injuries, right? You can look at, you can say, well, durability is part of value. And if you can't stay healthy to contribute, then that should be reflected in how we analyze you. Of course, the other side is, okay, this guy played hurt. He played at less than his best, and anybody can get hurt. And so you cut him a little slack for that and say, well, if Herb Jones is 100%, what's an already great season becomes better. I don't know what the answer is, but even the injury dynamic with him, it's not really easy to resolve and know what to do with it.
No, it's not. So I think it'll be interesting to see kind of what, and as we say, the voting in the SEC, it is what it is. I think you always have to keep in mind, everyone that votes is just, it's not realistically possible for them to watch every single game that's played in the league. And so I think you have to kind of keep that in perspective too.
All right, speaking of Moses Moody, let's talk Arkansas, because I'm with you. I think that the debate for Player of the Year, I think, is one of those two, unless you want to grant Shackelford an entry into discussion. And again, he wasn't even near the top when we talked. Maybe next time we do that, we'll entertain that. But I don't know. Moody, and last night they beat South Carolina so easily on the road. That's 101-73. He leads them in scoring with 28. Pulls 7 boards, 2 assists, no turnovers, 10 of 15 from the field, 4 of 4 from the line. I mean, one of his better box score games of the year, although, again, they win that game so easily. I don't know what you make of that. But we talked about, I brought up Desi Sills, okay, after last game, because he's basically a non-factor. So Sills, of course, goes out and hits 5 3-pointers, scores 15 points. J.D. Notae played one of his better games. Connor Vanover really wasn't a factor, but was on the floor a lot more. Although he did block 4 shots, so certainly defensively he was a factor. But it goes back to what I said about Arkansas last game is just so many guys who can step up, especially in terms of the scoring burden and be that guy from night to night. And then the next night they don't need him. And again, just another illustration of what makes this team so dangerous was on display Tuesday night in Columbia, Blake.
I do think you can take something away from this game, and that is the fact that Arkansas should have went in and completely destroyed South Carolina, and that's exactly what they did. Whereas, and look, I'm sure there will be people talking about this, but whereas Alabama, right, like they've struggled with some of these games on the road like that. And you can even look at the common opponent with South Carolina several weeks ago. That was a 3-point game. The game at Mississippi State, that was a bit of a struggle too for Alabama, but it's like Arkansas absolutely came out and just dominated this game, and that's what you want to see, I think, from a team that you're looking ahead and saying, okay, if I'm comparing Alabama and Arkansas, which right now doesn't, like, Alabama's the champions, like that's what we're saying, like they've already won the regular season title, but if we're trying to compare these two teams moving forward into March, I think you would have some people that would say, well, maybe my confidence is a little bit higher than Arkansas because they're proving away from home that they can completely, have a performance like this. Now, sure, if you look at Arkansas's 5 losses this year, 4 of them were on the road. I don't think that's anything out of the ordinary. Playing away from home is tougher than playing at home. We know that statistically. But, like, they've won 3 in a row now on the road. They won that tweaker at Kentucky. They won it overtime Missouri. And now they just come out and completely destroy a South Carolina team that they should have destroyed. And so I think I have to put some weight into that to say if they would have just let South Carolina hang around, knowing that the Gamecocks had just come off that win at Georgia, had played pretty well, but they didn't. Like, they just completely controlled this game. And I think that's what you wanted to see if you were an Arkansas fan, because that, I think, just adds more value to what you're doing right now. Like, this isn't just something where you're just winning some close games and maybe having some luck bounce in your favor. They're not. Like, they're just winning. Like, and I think they're, some of these games they're winning convincingly. And I think that's a big part of this for them. And that's why my confidence in them is going even higher. And I know I saw the debate on Twitter last night. Like, is Arkansas Final Four good? Like, I think the way they're playing right now, I think they're absolutely a team. Now, look, NCAA tournament games are about matchups and everything. Until the bracket comes out, I can't tell you that a team's going to make a Final Four unless you see their path to get there. But, like, are they capable, as they're built, to make that type of run? I think at this point, I'm sold on saying yes, because they have proven to me they're beating good teams now, which was something that they struggled to do in the middle of the season. They're beating bad teams the way they should beat bad teams. And when you combine that together, they potentially have, as we've said, an SEC Player of the Year in Moses Moody. They've got one of the most underrated guys, I think, in the league, in Jalen Tate. You mentioned Desi Seals. Like, look, he has a game like that. We know what Justin Smith can bring. Just go up and down the line. Like, I think that they are good enough to not just be a team that makes it to the second weekend, but I really believe that they kind of have all the tools. I didn't even mention JD Note. Like, this guy, he had a great game too. But I think they've got all the tools that they could really make a very deep run in the tournament.
This is where I have a struggle in terms of who do I think is going the furthest in the tournament, which is sort of overrated anyway because it's such a crapshoot. I mean, we like to think we know what a tournament team looks like, and
well, and until you get the bracket,
things,
there's no
right.
way. Like, if you get paired up with Gonzaga, like,
Bingo.
all of a sudden that's
Yeah.
completely different, right? Than if you're paired up with a team that's much more inconsistent. So,
yeah, well, I mean, assuming we could do this in a vacuum where somehow every team is equally seated, right, and matchups don't matter, and just like because it's a blind draw, we don't know that. So, taking that out of the equation, I'm sitting here struggling knowing what to do because I don't know if Alabama, which is just, I'm not going to say on cruise control, that I don't think that's fair, but I mean, there's a difference in the way that Alabama's putting opponents away and the way that Arkansas is doing it. Alabama's kind of doing it, and Arkansas is doing it with an exclamation point. And again, I don't know if that's a product of the situation where, again, Herb Jones not being 100%, that being part of it. Also, where Alabama has already sewn this thing up. Although you can also say, well, hey, look, this is a team playing for 1 or a 2 seed, so maybe that doesn't matter. I just don't know how to process right now the way that Arkansas is closing people out with the way the Alabama is. And I guess the other dynamic too, right? these names for Arkansas were not household names to your average SEC fan. Now, Alabama, we've watched him. People who've watched him know Herb Jones and oh, good grief. Shackelford is a guy who, of course, as you said, played a year ago. Petty's the guy I'm thinking.
Yeah.
Petty's been there for 4 years now. Javon Quinterly transferred from Villanova, so that's a name that was already on the college basketball scene a little bit. Arkansas, we didn't, unless you're really following, you don't know who these names are 3 months ago. So I look at it and say Alabama's a team where you've got seniors playing well, and all things considered, that's how it looks. Arkansas, a team where you're fitting all these parts together, of a lot of younger guys, and you put a lot of emphasis on momentum in that case, saying this is a team that's playing well and it's gelling at the right time. And whereas earlier in the year, we looked at them as maybe a borderline NCAA tournament team. That's certainly not what it is now. So I don't know how to process that whole discussion of how these teams are closing right now. Maybe you have a better idea than I do.
Alabama did its work up front. Arkansas is doing its work at the back end. Like that's kind of how it's gone. Because Arkansas started 2-4 in the league, whereas Alabama, we know, like they got off to a 9-0 start, 10-0 start, and so like that's the difference. Is I think, and I agree with you. Like I'm not saying Alabama's on cruise control, but you afford yourself a little bit of that though when you have a 10-0 start in league play. So I don't know that, again, the comparison I made was just to point out that I think that's a discussion that's going to be had. And like we said, it's probably not even a relevant discussion because until you actually look at the bracket, I don't think you can make those kind of judgments on, okay, is Alabama or Arkansas going to be able to go the furthest until you know who was in their path. Because like I said, if you're Arkansas, which by the way has now moved up in bracket matrix to the very top of the 4 seed line, so pushing for a 3, if you're Arkansas and you get as the number 4 seed maybe, or you stay in that range, maybe you're not the top one, but you get paired with Gonzaga, that's maybe a little bit different than if you get paired with, I don't know, I guess we probably couldn't even use Illinois as an example given what they did to Michigan last night. But I think, it's different though. It's different in terms of your matchups and who you could play and all this other stuff. But I think that's it. Like Alabama did so much work up front. They were beating good teams up front, whereas Arkansas struggled to beat good teams up front. Now it's almost flipped a little bit, where Alabama's last 5 wins, South Carolina, Georgia, Vanderbilt, Mississippi State, Auburn. All 5 of those teams are not making the NCAA tournament. Whereas Arkansas's last 5 or however many wins or so, you've got Missouri, Florida, Bama, LSU in there. So it's like, I don't know. Again, it's very hard to compare, and I don't think it's much of a discussion in terms of trying to compare it in the NCAA tournament realm of things. But if you just look at how teams are playing, you could certainly make the argument that Arkansas is playing better than Alabama right now. And I guess the fact that they beat them too not too long ago. I think it was a bit of a different game. We talked about and how it played out, and the numbers and the stats and the free throws and fouls and all that. It's probably a different game that's played much differently 9 times out of 10. But Arkansas's winning, and they're just winning convincingly, like we said, with some of these teams. So I don't know. Like I think it's a fascinating discussion. Probably not one that holds a lot of relevance, not knowing the NCAA tournament bracket. But listen, if these two teams meet in the SEC tournament championship, I don't think you're going to get a better matchup than that. So.
Hey, and if we knew the answer, that would take all the fun out of it anyway.
Well, right, exactly. Well, who needs that? So.
Well, when you said Arkansas has moved up to the top of the 4 line, my gut was that sounds low. So that prompted me to check bracketology, which has come out this morning. Joe Lunardi has Alabama as a 2, Arkansas as a 3, Tennessee as 6, Florida 7, Missouri 8, LSU 9.
That sounds about right. I think Missouri's got to be the team, though, that's sitting there thinking, man, we've moved down a bit. But I mean, it's right.
Well, and justifiably so.
I was going to say it is right, and like we've had the discussion about the metrics and the resume and all that. So I think that's probably the one team that's sitting there thinking, man, we were, what was it, 2 weeks ago? They were whatever the first bracket reveal was. They were top 4 seed, and now they're sitting there potentially, as we just talked about, maybe even finding them way into an 8-9 game, staring down Gonzaga or Baylor or teams like that. That's not ideal. So.
Well, if you rank them at the net, they're a 12 because they're 46 right now in that.
Yeah. So see, that's
and Arkansas is, by the way, a 12 this morning in the net ranking. So very seeding and net ranking consistent. And of course, if you're going to consider play over the last 2 months, that would factor in too. But
How about this? Here's a question for you. If Arkansas runs the table, wins the SEC championship in the tournament, and they play Alabama in the final, both teams run the table until then. Like, are both those teams 2 seeds? Surely.
oh
I mean,
boy,
like, that's an interesting discussion, though, right? Like, if Alabama wins out, Arkansas wins out, they play in the SEC tournament final, and Arkansas wins. I mean, like, you've got to push out, like, you've got to be able to push out those Big Ten teams somewhere, I guess, though, to have that happen. Or you would need, like, a West Virginia, Iowa, teams like that to maybe fall down a bit. But I think that's
okay. Here's how I see it. You probably know the answer to this better than I do. Okay, Gonzaga, Baylor going nowhere as ones, right?
No.
Michigan, in spite of just the spanking it took last night, going to be in that 1-2 range, probably one, barring something crazy, right?
I think of the 3, Michigan, Illinois, Ohio State, 2 of those 3 are going to take the other number 1 seeds.
Yeah, you beat me to it. So the Big Ten's going to have a foothold in there somewhere with at least
one's left
one
over,
and maybe a really high 2, and maybe a couple of ones. I don't know what you do with Houston. Either Iowa or Ohio State probably going to get crowded out. I mean, Big Ten could get 4 1s or 2s. I mean, to me, that's an interesting discussion because it depends on what the Big Ten does to cannibalize itself.
Yeah.
What you do with Houston, which has a high net ranking, but the AAC, not on par with the Big 12, the SEC, all that. In fact, I'm going to look where the AAC is 7th in KenPom this morning. And Houston, just for fun here, because I can't remember who else it's lost to. Okay, it's lost to Tulsa, which is 114 in KenPom. East Carolina, 137 in KenPom, one of the more out-of-the-blue outcomes of the basketball season. And Wichita State on the road, which is 73 in KenPom. I mean, you look at the wins. In fact, I'm going to go to what matters, which is net rankings. Houston's 2-1 against Quad 1, 4-1 against Quad 2. So just not a lot of.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the number means something, right? And I think Houston being 4 in KenPom also is loud to me. But when you're looking at hardware in terms of big wins and stuff, I just don't think that's going to sit on par with the Big Ten for sure, and probably not the SEC. So
here's another one.
You got to look for room. Go ahead.
Well, here's another one, and Rocco brought this up in our conversation, right? Was think about it. The SEC holds their championship on Selection Sunday, and that sometimes, as we've seen before, winning your doesn't really do a whole lot, right? So I think that is where for Arkansas, maybe if we're looking ahead, I would think potentially that probably as high as you could go, maybe a 3, even if you do that, because as we said, if that trend continues and the committee doesn't really shuffle anything around based on the SEC championship, then maybe you're looking at it to where even if Arkansas maybe beat Alabama, and they both again had those parallel streaks going into the championship game, Alabama would probably still finish ahead as a 2, and maybe Arkansas still only winds up as a 3. So that's something else to keep in mind.
Okay, I'm looking for paths to lockdown 1s and 2s, right? Gonzaga and Baylor are going to be there. The Big Ten's going to get a 1 somewhere. And the Big Ten, probably safe to say, is probably going to lock down 3 1s or 2s, maybe 4.
I think Michigan, Illinois, Ohio State are locks for either a 1 or a 2. And then I think really your only other shot is Iowa, right? Like I feel like that's it. So it's a matter of
what I'm trying to do is figure out what's available, right?
Right. So I would give them 4. So
we're going to go Gonzaga, Baylor, and then 3 Big Ten teams. So there's going to be 3 spots available.
Yeah.
For 1s or 2s. Alabama firmly in there right now. Again, I don't know what you do with Houston, and let me see if they have any opportunities. They play Memphis at home. That's going to help, I guess. I look at the conference tournament. I mean, there's not another win in there that you can get if you're Houston that just, if you're the committee, you look at it and moves the needle, right? That whole conference is NIT or below for the most part, other than Houston.
Yeah.
So if you're Houston, the needle the thread there is pretty narrow, and you've already stumped your toe a few times. So I would think that there's an opportunity there. I don't think Houston's a two sew it up by any stretch. I mean, not that you would argue, but and then you look, you got Colgate sitting there at 9 in the net. Kansas at 10. Nobody thinks this is the 2 seed Kansas team, I don't think. Do you?
I was gonna say I can't see, like, if we're talking about that debate where Alabama or Arkansas in those scenarios are trying to fight off Kansas, I think I would probably, and maybe that's a bias, but I think I would take both those teams. Even though, I mean, look, I think what gave Kansas the bump is if beating Baylor. Like that's going to give them a significant bump, I think, in some people's eyes. But like I don't know. Like, I just don't know if that's going to be enough. But it all depends on the tournament too. Like, I think that's another one where it's like, because I think, doesn't the Big 12, don't they finish their tournament on Saturday? I want to say that's usually right, because because it's SEC Big 10 on Sunday, which I don't even know. They may have moved around because of this season only, but I think the Big 12 plays their conference championship on Saturday. If that's the
Yeah.
case, and let's say Kansas won the title and beat Baylor again, then of course that makes it much different. So
Yeah, I think Villanova, another team that's got a path in there. If Villanova beats Creighton this next game, I think that helps.
yeah,
Of course, they lost to them already. I mean, Big 12, Texas Tech is always out there. That's a team that's closed strong. West Virginia, maybe. Florida State's the other one I'm kind of watching.
yeah.
Um, so I don't know. I mean, I this was all prompted by your question of can the league get a couple of twos?
I think it's going to be hard because, like I said, I think if the SEC championship were played on Saturday and Arkansas in that scenario won the championship, didn't lose a game the rest of the way, I think they could have a really good argument. But I wonder if three as high as they can go now, even if they win out, just because of that aspect. So
Well, I think it's hard. I don't know that it's impossible. And
no,
it
it's
may
not.
depend too on who you get in the bracket, right?
Yeah,
Because and this is the state of the bracket, right? They were talking in the Ole Miss Kentucky game last night that Ole Miss could be a 4 seed or a 10 seed,
yeah,
depending on the outcome of its next two games. So,
right.
I mean, if you're Arkansas, you kind of want to grab an LSU or a Florida or somewhere in there and not an Ole Miss or a Kentucky,
Yeah,
where you put together a couple of resume wins going into Championship Sunday, and then all of a sudden you've got more of a case. And if you're beating Ole Miss or Vandy or somebody like that, and they're not wins against teams that are going to be in the field, I think it becomes harder then. So maybe a lot of it just depends on the luck of the draw for the conference tournament. Is that fair?
yeah. I think we probably find out more about that once we actually see what the tournament looks like. So
Before we move on, I'm just going to rewind South Carolina's last 5 games for our amusement here, because it's wild. Well, not really wild. It's really terrible. But okay, a 28-point loss at home. And this is working backwards. Last game was a 21-point win at Georgia.
yeah,
A 21-point loss at Mississippi State, a 15-point loss at home to Missouri, and a 20-point loss at Tennessee. So with the Gamecocks, pretty early whether it's a game or not. And
yeah.
lately the answer is it's not a game.
Surprised that they just haven't been more competitive. Like, that's something that really wows you, I think. Man, and they're playing so fast too on offense, and I wonder, with a team like this and the preparation or the lack of preparation, the month pause and all those other stuff, I feel like this is just, man, one of those seasons where you almost felt like, I'm sure you could look around every conference and say there's that one team that has really just stood out, that's just completely just, you've thought, how in the world did it get here? Which Kentucky probably classifies that too in the SEC. But you have to look at South Carolina and be like, man, what a weird season it's been.
Yeah, and speaking of weird, it's weird to see Ole Miss beat Kentucky. I think they've won like 13 of the last 108 or something like that. And I think it'd been a while since they'd beaten Kentucky, period. I could be wrong, but Rebels get one in the nightcap last night, 70-62. Actually, game was a little closer than the score indicated. Um, Ole Miss came out like a house on fire defensively. I mean, I thought the energy they brought defensively really set the tone to that game. I don't know if they wore down a little bit later or Kentucky made adjustments because shots got easier for Kentucky from probably about the last 5 minutes of the first half on. But I felt like Ole Miss set the tone in that game with the defense it came out with.
Yeah, and that's the strength of that team, as we said. And I was kind of joking about the rock fight, but like that's how it played out early because we knew that was the strength of both of these two was their defense. And I think for Ole Miss, it was just another one of those of you could probably look back at different games throughout the season and say if Ole Miss just had a little bit more consistency on offense, like they're an NCAA tournament team right now, but they just haven't had enough of that because their defense is good enough to really play with a lot of teams. It's just it's more than that. You got to win games. You got to be able to score consistently too. But I thought they got a good game from KJ Buffin. He had a double-double. I thought he played pretty well. He fouled out late, but that didn't help. But they still were able to close out the game, and they just got more balance. Like they have more production offensively, and that's what you want to see. I think from them was to be able to do that on the Kentucky side. Again, I don't know that Kentucky just played that poorly. I mean, they didn't make free throws. That didn't help. When they went 15 to 25, 60% from the line is not going to get it done in a game like that. But I didn't think Kentucky just played awful. They just don't have the outside shooting that sometimes they need to be able to win games like this on the road. And so when you just don't have any sort of element of being able to do that, that makes it harder. And then again, if you don't make your free throws, that puts you behind things a little bit too. So.
I'm watching Kentucky. I'm just going, I don't think this team has an offensive identity.
No.
And that's rarely the case for Kentucky, right? Because some years, and not so much lately under Calipari, but some years it's been they've got a couple of shooters. A lot of years it's been big men, which they got two talented ones. And I want to touch on that in a minute. And most of the time it's having that stud point guard, a John Wall or somebody that can get in the lane and make stuff happen. And really, it's more that than anything. I can't name the last time Kentucky didn't have one of those. And you just watch a team, and it's not a terrible team, right? And they do some good things on defense, but I just look at them, and I've never seen a team at Kentucky that just has so little of an offensive identity as this one has.
Yeah, I went back to the NIT team 2012-13. Even that team, even that team had Alex Poitras, who was a freshman then. They had Willie Cauley-Stein, who was a freshman. Nerlens Noel, freshman. These are guys who have played, in the NBA. So even that team had guys like that. They had Archie Goodwin on that team, who I think wound up being pretty consistent scoring wise for them. But it's even that team had that next gear offensively at times. This team just doesn't. They don't. And that's what we've said so many times is this is such a unique roster that he's had here. And that's not, it just didn't come together. I think on paper, we looked at it and said, hey, this potentially could be a really good roster. And that's why a lot of people had him ranked in the top 15 heading into the season. But it just hasn't come together. And, they're sitting here at 8-15, which it's even hard for me to say that. I don't even think the words don't even want to form in my mouth when I say it, because it's just impossible to think, well, shouldn't we be saying 15-8? No, they're 8-15. And, if you look at all the different games that they have scored 60-ish points in, you just go up and down the line at their losses. That's pretty much it for Kentucky. They have just not been able to hit above that 67-point mark in the majority of their losses. They've had a couple games like that Arkansas one, of course, they scored 80. They scored 71 against Tennessee, 70 against Missouri. But the rest of them have all been 67 or less. That's what they've scored, and that's not going to get it done. When they hit 70, they have a chance to win. But if they score less than 70, it's pretty clear they're not in the ballpark in terms of being able to win some of these games.
One thing that stood out to me last night, I thought Olivier Sarr really played well for them in stretches and kind of maybe sort of seeded their comeback a little bit. That's probably strong, but he's regressed a little bit since Wake Forest. And that's a kid, if you had said 3 months ago, Kentucky enters March, number 10 in the country, and Olivier Sarr is a player of the year candidate, I think we would have all believed that, right?
Yeah.
But you look at him, and it took him a little while at Wake to get going, but he averages 13.7 a game last year. That's down to 10.5. Field goal percentage down from 53 to 47. Interestingly enough, he's become a better three-point shooter. Free throw percentage about the same. Rebounding way down. 9.0 a game to 5.3. And by the way, minutes almost the same. It's only a minute and a half difference. He played a little bit more at Wake. And maybe that's situational. Maybe that's they've got Isaiah Jackson on the back line and he just happens to grab those that and Sard doesn't. I don't know. I hesitate to say he's become a worse rebounder, but I really would have thought this kid would have been, probably a 16 and 9, 16 and 10 guy for them. And the outcome would have been different. Not that he's having a terrible season, but he had improved so much at Wake and was a kid with a lot of potential out of high school. That's one of the storylines for me. I don't think we've really talked about, but I think had his season gone a different way, maybe the conversation's a little different, as many close games as they've played.
Yeah, it's strange to think when he transferred, people thought he had transferred up from Wake to Kentucky. Well, Wake won 13 games last year, and Kentucky, more games played, but it's like, man, it's so strange to think about, isn't it, in terms of what you thought that he was going to be able to sort of bring to the table. But I think, too, it has a lot to do with, just sort of the dynamic around him. And it's just, as we said, it's not come together. And I think it's just the inconsistency. And we've always said, too, Kentucky's not for everyone in terms of knowing kind of what the pressure that comes along with that role of playing at Kentucky this year, probably not as elevated, knowing that, it's been a little bit different from an atmosphere standpoint and all that. But still, like, the pressure's there. Like, maybe the pressure is even more so there in a season like this because you're thinking, like Kentucky fans are not happy about this. I don't care what kind of year it is. They're not happy to be sitting here at 8-15 and being in the conversation and everyone that's had about the Blue Bloods and the demise and all this other stuff. They are the poster child for that this season. So it's kind of one of those things where I don't know. It's probably a mixture of different things, but there's no doubt. I think people thought that he was an SEC Player of the Year candidate this season, and as we said, we made our 14, and we didn't have a Kentucky player in there. And I think the only one we probably would have considered would have been Isaiah Jackson, and we still thought he was considerably behind some of the others in that group. So yeah, it's been a different year for sure.
Well, the topic of conversation for a couple of weeks now, and this was after Kentucky won 3 in a row after a bunch of close losses, is this team peaking just in time to make that run in Nashville? And I don't think that's going to happen. I'll give you the reason why. They got to have Isaiah Jackson on the floor. Last night he fouls out in 24 minutes. Game before against Florida, he draws 4 in 16. Gets 4 against Tennessee in 21 minutes the game before that. Then go back another game, fouls out against Vandy in 20. And then he only got 1 against Auburn in an 82-80 win in Lexington. But I think that his foul proneness, combined with the fact that the SEC has now said they're going to limit ticket sales to 3,400, you're not going to have 15,000 Big Blue fans in Nashville screaming at officials. And let's face it, officials are humans like anybody else. I think that was one thing that they've had such a home court advantage in Nashville in that tournament. I just think the combo of those two things, to me, again, on a team that does not have an offensive identity that we can really state definitively, I just came away from that game last night feeling worse about Kentucky's chances to run the table and sneak into the dance.
No, the Big Blue Nation's still probably going to get about 3,100 in there of the 3,400.
Probably. We'll talk about a scalper's market. My goodness. There won't be many of them, but the prices of those puppies is going to be off the charts.
And think about like the past year, like people want to get out. Like they want to, like, it's just, I think you could have, even with Kentucky sitting here with 8 wins or potentially, I think they should beat South Carolina, but potentially entering the SEC tournament with only 9 wins, I think you're still going to get probably 3,000 in there. But I would say that Arkansas fans and Alabama fans are probably going to challenge that this season. I think that you'll have a pretty good group of those two in there, given the, again, how well those two have played. But you would have to think that overall, I don't know how many Tennessee fans, because of the frustration with how they're playing now, may be different, but my guess is it's going to be Kentucky, Alabama, and Arkansas are going to be the ones that kind of control the 3,400 allotment there.
All right. Last game of the night, or not the last game, but the last one that we have discussed, the pickup game in Baton Rouge last night. Vanderbilt without Dylan DeSue, which was expected. Scottie Pippen, we didn't know. He didn't play. The Commodores started 2 walk-ons in Brayley Albert and Isaiah Rice, and really that was a point of contention with that fan base. And Jerry Stackhouse, in the press conference, when asked about it, why'd you start Rice? His answer was because I wanted to, which
Well,
I don't think sat well with the fan
he's
base.
the
It's
coach.
great. He is the coach. You might expect a little bit more of an answer, but I mean, Vanderbilt falls behind. I think it was 9-0, and that was look. It was going to be a difficult tightrope to walk to get an upset. Of course, Vanderbilt just did that against Ole Miss. But on the road, and what's going to be the first of 3 games in 4 days, 5 days for them. You had to have a good start against a team that can just score buckets and bunches, and that really, I don't know, it felt like they were dead in the water a couple of minutes in.
Yeah, and I mean, we talked about the stat, and I pointed out again after the game, but like it was just a matter of seeing if Darius Days was going to hit double figures, because if he did, LSU was winning, and that's what happened again. Now they're 15-1 now. Whenever he hits double digits in scoring, so pretty crazy to think about. But no, it was. I mean, the game went about as you expected, knowing that, Pippen and the Sioux were not playing for Vanderbilt. I know what they did at home against Ole Miss, but LSU just a much different offensive team. And when they get going, we've said it so many times. That's what makes LSU frustrating. Is how good they can be on offense. They can put up points, but the defense just isn't there. And I thought that they had better stretches of defense here, probably made easier by the fact that they weren't having to try to figure out ways to stop Pippen and Dessou and that type of stuff. But I mean, it was just one of those games that I thought probably played out exactly how we thought it would. I don't want to take anything away from Max Evans, because I think he's someone that, that guy, ever since he's been there, like, we know all the losses that he's experienced as a player on the floor there for Vanderbilt, and just kind of the trajectory of his career, kind of when he first started there, what was that, 2017, 18 maybe. The program has just completely changed, but I think that guy is just, he's kept playing, and I give him all the credit in the world for that. Just the guy just battles, and as we said, it hasn't translated into a lot of wins for the program overall, but that was something too that I think is worth noting. But elsewhere, we kind of mentioned Cam Thomas earlier, double. He does stuff outside of scoring. That's what you want to see from him. Trendon Watford did a little bit of everything. But this is what you expect from this LSU team. Their Big Four did what their Big Four were supposed to do, and you're going to have a chance to win when they play up to their potential.
Yeah, frankly, I was a little underwhelmed by LSU. I thought they should have won that game by 30. Vanderbilt, if it's going to have a shot, is going to have to shoot the threes, and 8 of 27 for the Commodores in that one. That basically rules out a win. Of course, LSU turns it over 16 to Vandy's 8. I just felt like that's a game that if LSU's life depends on it, the margin is a lot bigger. But that was a team they knew that they could kind of cruise in that one, and they kind of did, which I don't know if I'm super happy about that if I'm Will Wade, because, again, habits beget more of the same, and you're pretty close to the tournament now. So I don't know how I feel about that if I'm an LSU fan.
Well, and I also think it's not unlike anything they've seen this season. Like, I think they've seen that before, probably at times, with this team, and sometimes that's resulted in losses, and ones that maybe aren't close. Like, I think the Georgia game was a good example. Like, that was one of those games where you feel like LSU just came in thinking they were probably going to have a chance to win, and they come out and get 91 points scored on them. And this was a little different, as we said. It was at home, and they, for the most part, outside of some of the games, like they are one of those teams that just plays better at home. And even in losing that game to Texas Tech the way they did, and the Alabama game, I think is a little bit of an outlier. That 30-point loss they had, sort of like the perfect storm there. But yeah, I mean, it's LSU is what they are at this point. I don't think that they are doing anything that surprises us, because we kind of know what we're getting from this team. Lots of good talent on the floor, but just some of the things that they don't seem to have that can kind of take them to that next level in terms of being up there, with Alabama and Arkansas.
Any more hoops thoughts before we do maybe a 2-minute baseball recap on yesterday?
No, a couple things I did want. We just talked about LSU. I think they did wrap up the double bye, correct?
I think that's the case. Yeah.
So I think they wrapped up the double bye. One other thing I wanted to point out. This was a stat that was brought to me by an Arkansas fan on Twitter. I have no reason to believe he's lying to me, but he did say that in the post game interview, Muss said that Arkansas had 304 passes in that game against South Carolina. That's the most he's ever had as a coach for any team that he's coached. So I thought that was a pretty great stat there. So
He knew this right after the game?
apparently, listen.
Wow.
Muss loves the numbers, and I'm pretty sure, they keep up with that kind of stuff, and they probably do it during the game. So I bet that's something they keep up with. So that's pretty cool. I like that stat. So.
Okay, let's see. So Alabama's the one. In fact, I meant to do this. Arkansas is safely in as the 2, I think. LSU has clinched the double bye. You got Florida sitting there in the conference standings and winning percentage, actually 3rd right now at 9-5.
Pretty sure all Florida has to do is win, and I mean that would clinch them either in one of those double bye spots. So that would be pretty. I think they just have to beat Missouri on or tonight. So
Yeah, I'm trying to think of the path to if anybody could beat them out for that. I mean, like you said, if they win for sure, but if it goes badly, I don't know what. So it looks like probably Alabama, Arkansas, LSU for sure. Florida, yeah, I think they'll handle Missouri at home, but we'll see. Then they got the Vols and Knoxville, so that's another chance. I guess the Wednesday game not wrapped up yet, because if Vanderbilt wins at Ole Miss, which I don't think it will, but it did just beat the Rebels in Nashville, and South Carolina has got Kentucky on the road, which I'm not crazy about their chances in that one. And then you've got the, A&M is
how about
allegedly
that?
going to play.
We haven't even talked about that. They're playing a game tonight. So
That's allegedly. I mean, I don't.
I don't know.
Would it surprise you 5 minutes before tip
Oh
off
my
that one
goodness!
gets canceled?
If that happened, if I'm Mississippi State, I would lose my mind. So
yeah, I wasn't sure if A&M was still in the conference at this point. That's a joke, but yeah, I mean, I guess. Yeah, I'd have to look at the tiebreakers and stuff.
we'll figure it out. I think after,
show.
I was going to say tonight's games, I think will give us a much clearer picture because everybody will have one game left. So yeah.
Well, we'll do that tomorrow, I think. In terms of baseball, let's see. The league goes 4-0 yesterday. A&M gets a shutout of Houston Baptist. Ole Miss 16-4 over Memphis. South Carolina 19-8 over Winthrop, and I think the upset there is that Wes Clark didn't hit a home run. Predictably did get walked 3 times, so there's that. But Carolina, I mean, Eister, I didn't realize he didn't have a home run till yesterday. He's been a big hitter for them. Brady Allen hits one, so they find the long ball in other places. And Kentucky won again, so the Cats still undefeated. Not exactly playing a murderer's row schedule, but, give them credit. A lot of teams, even good ones, stump their toes in a couple of these games every year. And so the Cats stay on the good side with another win. I think we'll talk some of this probably Thursday with Barry.
Yep.
Which will be tomorrow. I don't know that there's much more to discuss in baseball. But in any case, Blake, I think we're done for the day, unless you've got something else to add.
No, I think, like you said, we South Carolina scoring runs in baseball. Basketball tournament picture gets a little bit clearer after Wednesday's games. So yeah, this is setting up to where we're getting closer to the SEC tournament here. It's crazy to think about, but it's also fun to think about. We'll be talking SEC tournament next week around this time, so that is very exciting.
All right, he's Blake Lovell. I'm Chris Lee. Remember to rate, review, and subscribe to us on our podcast, wherever you get those. Apple Podcast is where I download mine. That's a good destination if you've not done that. Of course, check out our site at southeastern14.com. Follow us on Twitter at 14southeastern. Anyway, thank you for listening to Wednesday's episode of the 14. We'll be back with another episode talking some baseball and some hoops again on Thursday.